Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are so happy that you're joining us tonight. This is our public webinar series hosted by Prodrome Science. On the first Wednesday of every month, Dr. Goodenowe and I, Victoria Venkatraman, will be discussing different health topics with the goal of improving access and awareness of science-based information to help improve health and well-being. Tonight's topic is restoring and maintaining cardiovascular health. Cardiovascular disease is the #1 cause of death in the world. Virtually everyone is familiar with the term, but a lot of us don't really know what it means or how it's caused. On this evening's webinar, we will answer the following questions. What is heart health? Why and how does the heart and cardiovascular system lose function? How do you know if your vascular system is impaired? What can you do to restore the health of your heart and circulatory system, and how can you maintain its optimal function? If you like what you hear today, please be sure to join us on March 6th, where we will be covering multiple sclerosis, or MS, in honor of MS Awareness Month. You can go to prodrome.com for all of the details. But before we jump into today's webinar, just a few administrative items are in order. First, this is a public webinar. It is open to everyone, and we welcome everyone. Our format will be conversational. While detailed and specific scientific and medical content will be discussed and explained as best as possible, this is not a scientific or medical lecture. You should always consult your doctor or health professional before incorporating anything new into your health plan. If you are a healthcare practitioner, Dr. Goodenowe also presents a detailed lecture at its Advanced Practitioner Roundtable at the end of every month. These lectures are filled with scientific literature and data and are specifically designed for healthcare practitioners. This month's roundtable will also discuss heart health and take place on February 27th. At the end of each roundtable discussion, Dr. Goodenowe moderates an open discussion forum for healthcare practitioners. If you are a healthcare practitioner and are interested in being a part of the roundtable, please contact customer service at prodrome.com. Everyone is encouraged to submit questions and share your experience in the chat section. Time is limited, so only select questions will be answered live by Dr. Goodenowe at the end of our webinar. The Prodrome Science customer service team will make every effort to either answer your questions or direct you to the practitioners who can assist you. And lastly, stay tuned at the end of the webinar for an exclusive discount code for webinar attendees. This webinar and the content we speak about has not been evaluated by the FDA, and this conversation and the information we share is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Well, thank you all so much for joining, and I think it's time to get started. So tonight's topic is on cardiovascular health. I'm so happy to see how many of you have joined us today, and we're all here with the shared interest of learning more about one of the most crucial aspects of our well-being, heart health. Before we dive into strategies and insights, let's take a moment to understand the public health landscape surrounding cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of mortality in the world. In the United States, 1 in every 5 deaths is caused by heart disease, making it one of the most pressing public health challenges of our time. While heart disease is the most prevalent age-related condition, it is more easily prevented than cancer or Alzheimer's disease. And yet it kills more people than cancer in the United States, and many of these deaths occur in what seems to be out of the blue. This information underscores the urgency of addressing cardiovascular health and highlights the importance of taking proactive measures in prevention, early detection, and effective management of cardiovascular conditions. Throughout this webinar, we'll break down the science and explore evidence-based strategies, lifestyle modifications, and innovative approaches aimed at restoring and maintaining your cardiovascular health. I think it's time to introduce our expert guest, Dr. Dan Goodenowe. Dr. Goodenowe is the founder of Prodrome Sciences and the author of Breaking Alzheimer's. He has 19 patents and has invented an advanced and comprehensive biomarker detection system using eye and cyclotron resonance mass spectrometry. This advanced technology is now available to the public as the Prodrome Scan blood test, which can be ordered from a Prodrome certified practitioner. I met Dr. Goodenowe working on a trial with the team at the Regenesis Project. During this trial, we showed that using the breakthrough plasmalogen solution, we were able to reverse cognitive decline in 41% of the participants and improve mobility in almost all of them. Dr. Goodenowe has a PhD in psychiatry, and he studied the neurochemistry of the brain. At Prodrome Science, he created the first and only clinically validated plasmalogen restoration supplement on the market today. Plasmalogens have been very successful in supporting brain health, but are also important for heart health. While 30% of the phospholipids in the brain are made of plasmalogens, a whopping 50% of your heart lipids are made from plasmalogens. So I'm guessing that low plasmalogen levels can't be good for the heart either, which I'm sure we'll get into later. I know that a lot of you joining are looking to improve your cardiovascular health, and I know that Dr. Goodenowe and his practitioners have had some great success in restoring cardiovascular health. So I'm really excited that we have him here with us tonight to talk more about it. Welcome, Dr. Goodenowe, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Victoria. Happy to be here. You know, the cardiovascular disease space is so really overwhelming to most people, right? And most things when they work, we really don't concern ourselves. But, you know, people hear so many different words. They got myocarditis, for example, which is an inflammation of the heart. Or maybe they had, you know, a loved one that died of a heart attack, like, you know, myocardial infarctions. You know, or you have hardening of the arteries, which we've studied for years and years and years, which is atherosclerosis. And there's so many other things, like maybe you had an abnormal electrocardiogram, or you had an abnormal echocardiogram for ejection fraction. So when you talk about cardiovascular health, it's such a large umbrella term that it becomes overwhelming. And it feels like all of these things are so disconnected from one another. And fundamentally, they're not. And so what, you know, if we do our job properly tonight, I think we'll make cardiovascular health and disease a little more understandable for everybody. And we'll try to use general language and general examples that just hopefully will make sense to everybody, because it is something that we should all understand. And once we understand the basics of it, we can understand what is good cardiovascular health, what is bad cardiovascular health, and what we can do about it. So yeah, so cardiovascular itself is a dual term, right? So we're talking about cardio, which is the heart. That's a muscle. It's a muscle in the middle of your chest. And then the vascular system really contains three components. It's your arteries that go outward from your heart, the capillaries that are really where all of these arteries go down to smaller and smaller diameters until they're just basically small enough to fit red blood cells, if you will. And then you have the return system, which is your veins. And those really, that's miles upon miles upon miles of vasculature. And that's the vascular part of the cardiovascular system and cardiovascular disease. So we'll dig into those one at a time.
What does a good cardiovascular system look like? Like, how do you know that your cardiovascular system is functioning well?
Yeah, so, you know, it's really quite amazing. It's quite, like, if you're not awestruck by the human body, you're really not paying attention to it, right? Because see, the human body has about 5 quarts of blood. Really, that's just a little more than a gallon of milk in your refrigerator, right? And it's circulating all of that every minute. So the average circulatory rate of the human body is about 5 liters per minute at rest. As I'm resting here, every minute, okay, my entire blood supply gets recirculated. Now, if I'm exercising, that can go up to 15 to 20 liters per minute. So I can recirculate my entire blood supply 3 to 4 times per minute under extensive exercise. And so that's quite remarkable in and of itself. And so the fundamental aspect of the vascular system is the ability to distribute the nutrients that are generated from our food supply or from our fat cells or from one organ or another organ, because we have different organs that share different types of biochemistry, and the oxygen from the air to all the cells that need it, and then to remove the waste from those systems and do that continually forever, right? That's the interesting thing about your cardiovascular system is it never rests. You can't say, well, I'm just going to rest my cardiovascular system for a couple of days and then come back to it. Like it's once your heart starts beating, it just doesn't stop, or you hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully it doesn't stop. That's the plan. So yeah, so
Totally.
but if you think about the heart from itself, though, if you go right from the core components of it, the heart itself is a muscle, and it's a 4-chamber pump, and it's got 2 pumping chambers, which is the ventricles. Like you have your left ventricle and your right ventricle, and people think, oh, your heart's on the left side of your body, but that's not true. Your heart's right in the center, but your left ventricle is bigger than your right ventricle, and that's why it feels like when your heart feels like it's slightly on the left side, when in fact it's not. It's right in the center. But your left ventricle is what pumps the most of your blood. And it pumps it to all your other organs, pumps the blood to your brain, to your kidneys, to your gastrointestinal tract, and back to your heart. And your right ventricle basically pumps your blood to your lungs. And this is where it gets really interesting, because so if you follow the blood flow across the system, so starting, say, from the left ventricle, the blood gets pumped out, and that's where your high pressure comes from, your top level of your blood pressure monitor. But it goes to different parts of your organs. They say 20% to your kidneys and 15 to 20% to your brain. And then it goes down to the capillaries, and it distributes oxygenated blood to all your cells, but it also distributes the nutrients from one cell to another. So it distributes the nutrients and oxygen. That's the arterial blood supply. It's basically a nutrient, and it also distributes the waste products, say, to your kidneys or other places that do waste. So it's all one big soup, if you will, at that point. Then once it gets past the capillaries, that little thin, very thin part, then the cells that are making things are dumping nutrients into your blood, and they basically dump the nutrients into your deoxygenated blood, and that just pours back in, and it goes back into your right atrium, which is the holding cell to go to your lungs. But that's cool, because all of your blood goes into the right atrium. So your entire blood supply gets mixed every cycle around your body. Then it goes into your right ventricle, pumps it into your lungs. Your lungs exchange oxygen with the air and carbon dioxide out. Simple diffusion process. And then now this oxygenated, nutrient-rich blood goes from the lungs into your left atrium, ready for the next cycle. And it's pretty interesting, because then you think about how you have certain organs that share certain systems. And we don't think about this. We think about it all as one thing. But a good example is muscles. People may take creatine for muscle building, for example, right? So creatine is used for muscles. But creatine is made by 2 different organs of the body. It's made by your kidneys, make part of it. Your liver makes part of it. And then it has to get to your muscles. And then the waste goes back to your kidneys. So think about this. So your kidneys make a molecule called guanidinic acetylenic acid, GAA. And so the arterial supply goes, capillaries of the kidneys make this GAA molecule, goes into the blood supply. Well, that doesn't go directly from the kidneys to your liver. That goes into your heart first. And so it goes into the right atrium, goes into the lungs, goes back out. And then the next cycle, some of that GAA goes into your liver, and your liver takes that GAA, converts it to creatine. But again, doesn't go directly from the liver to your muscles, goes back in the blood supply, back in the heart, and it gets cycled again to your muscles. So your muscles now take the creatine, and if the muscles break the creatine down into creatinine, which we measure for kidney function, it goes. So it takes 3 cycles of the circulatory system for that interorgan system to work. And so it's pretty amazing system. And what's interesting when we're doing blood work is that the human blood supply is very much in equilibrium with every single organ of your body. All of your organs dump fundamentally into that right atrium. So that's kind of and that's
That
how it
is
works.
so profound, it's the leading cause of death in the world, and a heart attack happens, and everything stops because this cardiovascular system is this relationship between the cardio, the heart muscle that's pumping, and then the vasculature, which is supplying your whole body, all of your organs, all of your cells with the nutrients and everything that they need. And it's constantly in a flow state, bringing oxygen, nutrients to and from the organs. I mean, I've never really thought of it like this constant flow or rhythm that your body is in, but it makes sense why your heart is so important and why it never gets to take a break. As you were describing this, though, this might feel like a silly question, but I realized I don't know that much about blood. Like, what is blood made of?
Yeah, blood itself. So yeah, so blood is obviously got a lot of stuff in it. About 45% of it is red blood cells. So that's the main part of actually. So oxygen supply is truly one of the main reasons of, and the ability to distribute oxygen and then remove carbon dioxide. So for example, the air that we breathe is about 20% oxygen and it's less than 1% carbon dioxide. And so when we breathe air through our lungs, the concentration difference allows the hemoglobin in your red blood cells in the alveoli of your lungs to get absorbed. But then once your body, because we're a hydrocarbon burning system, right? We take hydrocarbons, our biochemistry burns them into carbon dioxide and water. So we create all this carbon dioxide. So then the concentration of carbon dioxide in our blood becomes quite high. So when that concentrated carbon dioxide comes into your lungs again, it's X% in your blood, but it's only like 0.1% in the air. So the carbon dioxide leaves. So it's a pretty interesting respiratory process. But blood, so, well, 45% of it is this red blood cells. About 55% is your plasma, and that contains your proteins and the other cells. You have like white blood cells and, there's your immune cells and so on and so forth. But then the serum part has a bunch of proteins. There's, your glucose is water soluble molecules and amino acids, but fatty acids are transported on these albumins. Then we have the LDL cholesterol particles, HDL, all these apolipoproteins, because your blood is fundamentally aqueous, right? But its job is to constantly move bacon fat around. Like, can you imagine trying to put bacon fat down the sink, right? But that's what we're doing in the blood. Like, we're taking oil, like triglycerides, like your blood transport triglycerides all around your body over and over and over again, cholesterol, phospholipids, and it does it without any kind of clogging, if you will. And how it does that is with these apolipoproteins. It absorbs, they're kind of like lipid rafts of things.
So when someone takes a blood test, like a lot of people, if they're looking into how their health is doing in general, not just cardiovascular health, their doctor will tell them to do a blood draw. Is that kind of like an oil change, or is that more like, how would you kind of describe the blood's role in how you can look at it, but the biomarkers of the body?
So it's interesting because a lot of times we think about the blood supply as a delivery, right? Which it is. But when we're doing a blood test, what we're actually measuring is what's coming out of your cells. Okay, so we're actually measuring what your cells are not or either producing. So if we're talking about metabolites, for example, of drugs, or we're talking about, so for instance, creatine is measured as well as how well our livers function. Or creatinine, if creatinine gets elevated, it says, oh, my kidneys aren't clearing a molecule. So the blood supply, so our cholesterol levels, plasmalogen levels in the blood, nutrient levels, a lot of these things are measurements of what's coming out of your cells, because it's in equilibrium with everything.
So it's more like a smog test than
right.
It's like kind of testing how well your organ, you can see how all of your organs are functioning, because you can see how things are getting transferred. You're basically measuring the flow of nutrients throughout your body.
Right. And so there'd be some metabolites that are specific to certain organs, like troponin, which is a marker of a heart attack, for example. That would be a molecule that's specific to heart function. And there'd be some molecules that are specific to other organs. But yeah, so the blood is quite remarkable in that it touches everything and it is in equilibrium with everything. So you can use it to deal with these things quite.
And so we've kind of talked about what the blood is made of, but let's talk about, like, I hear blood pressure a lot as one of the first things people talk about when they're trying to assess someone's cardiovascular health. So just a little more about that.
So fundamentally, cardiovascular disease is one of three things, and really only three things only. It's either you have a lack of, either you're suffocating, like your lungs are not providing oxygen so that your cardiovascular system cannot distribute oxygen to your rest of your body, or the vascular system itself has blockages or restrictions. And so the heart's pumping, but it can't actually move the material to the places it wants to go. And if you get blockages, that typically it's a loss of oxygen in any kind of terminal field. And the third thing is that the heart muscle itself can become damaged, like in a myocarditis or cardiotoxicity. And sometimes the heart muscle gets damaged from a vascular issue. So for example, myocardial infractions are typically caused by a blood flow blockage that prevents oxygen going to the heart. And so because of the heart pumping actually supplies blood flow back to the heart, right? So it's actually self-feeding itself. So when we're talking about basic cardiovascular function, blood pressure and heart rate variability are probably the two core general markers, right? Like you should have, like when your heart pumps, the top blood pressure is your systolic, your bottom pressure is your diastolic. So when your left ventricle pushes the blood out to your system, your arterial wall should flex appropriately. So you're going to hear this in this presentation a lot about endothelial function dysfunction, because fundamentally over 90% or more, way more of all cardiovascular disease is fundamentally endothelial dysfunction. The
And so
endothelial
what's the endothelial cell, or what is that? What part of your vascular system?
Yeah, so your arteries are basically, you can think of them as they're muscles, and they're concentric tubes of muscles. And on the very innermost muscle layer is called the endothelium. And this is a packed group of cells that are like a garden hose, and its job is to make sure that the liquid in the lumen goes through it to its location and doesn't leak out. So you don't want a leaky layer. Okay, so a leaky endothelial is a bad thing. And fundamentally, all cardiovascular disease kind of starts with a leaky endothelial. So anything leaky is bad, right? A leaky gut is bad, a leaky blood-brain barrier is bad, and a leaky roof at home is bad. So leaky is bad. So a leaky endothelial layer is fundamentally the beginning of all of these cardiovascular or atherosclerotic type cascades, because what has to happen is inflammatory molecules have to get past that endothelial layer, and then they form an irritant in between the layers of your arteries. It's almost like taking a sand into an oyster that gradually turns into a pearl. So you get something that passes through that endothelial layer and it gets stuck in between, and it creates an irritant and it grows. And you get this.
But instead of a pearl, it's a plaque.
Instead of a pearl,
we
it's
don't
a
want that.
plaque. Exactly. And what it's interesting is, like, most people think that plaques are kind of like they stick to the sides of the walls of your arteries, but really that's not truly what happens. It happens inside, in between the walls of the arteries, and then it starts, as the plaque builds up, it squishes the artery down until eventually there's no clearance. And so at some point, if the atherosclerotic plaque grows to a large enough extent, it can actually either block flow completely, which is what you get from a myocardial infarction, or you get a stroke, or it can also, because it causes the increase in blood pressure, you can get a bursting of a blood vessel, which is a hemorrhage, for example. So you actually get bleeding, internal bleeding, or sometimes that plaque can be the formation can burst, and then the particles that are in that plaque can then be released into the bloodstream and cause further blockage later down the stream, because as it goes to smaller and smaller arterial sizes into capillaries, so on and so forth.
So tell me if I'm kind of following correctly. Sounds like cardiovascular disease is essentially kind of the nutrient starvation. Your body, your organs, your cells are starved of nutrients that they get from the blood, whether it's oxygen or vitamins or whatever, because there's the heart, and then there's this whole vascular system, and the vascular system can, like a hose, become kinked.
Correct.
And so the problem is that the blood's not able to flow. And so for someone with high blood pressure, for example, does that mean that their arteries are also tight, and so the pressure is constricted, or what is high blood pressure?
So fundamentally, when the arterial walls are stiff, so the hardening of the arteries, so the heart is pumping, but the artery walls are not flexing. Okay, so the endothelial layer is not flexing. And when the arterial wall flexes, it also releases vasodilating molecules like the nitric oxide pathway. And so if it can't flex, the pressure goes up fundamentally. And so hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis, either blockages or stiffness, then that stiffness of the arteries has secondary problems as well. So one, you get the elevated systolic blood pressure, which basically says the left ventricle is trying to push blood through the system, but the arteries are not flexing appropriately, or the capillaries are not flexing and not adjusting to the flow of blood appropriately. But then this also affects what's called heart rate variability. And that's another really powerful predictor of future cardiac events. It's predictor of all-cause mortality. And so your body has to adjust its heart rate based upon its demand. And it's actually the endothelial wall that does that. And it's actually a combination of near the carotid artery, or it's called the carotid sinus cavity. As it flexes open, nerves sense that, oh, the pressure is building, and it sends a signal back to your heart to lower the heart rate. And it's the baroreflex system. So it's a combination of the endothelial wall being able to flex and the neurological synaptic transmission and axonal transmission back to the heart. So it's quite nicely, tightly rated. So what happens then is, if you have poor heart rate variability, so high variability of the heart is important, because it means that minor changes in your blood flow, minor changes in your heart cardiac demand are efficiently adjusted according to demand, which is a good thing. And you may have seen some presentations when we talk about neurovascular coupling of the brain. It allows.
Is it kind of how your heart's able to adjust to stress or different scenarios? And is that okay?
Yeah. And that's why basically most, other than acute toxicity or suffocation or asthma or carbon monoxide poisoning, other than those kind of overt issues, the vast majority of cardiovascular disease starts at this endothelial dysfunction process. And then
it's in the vascular part of cardiovascular. It's all the veins and the artery. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So I'm thinking about what could possibly be causing the garden hose to kink. Like, what is causing these plaques? And the first thing that comes to mind is what I hear a lot of doctors talk about. A lot of people say, oh, I want to work on my heart health. I want to lower my cholesterol. What is cholesterol, first of all? And why is it associated with cardiovascular disease?
This is such an important topic, because this is so confusing to most people, because things have become synonymous, like LDL. So if we take a little bit of sidebar just to kind of explain cholesterol and your membrane structure. So this endothelial cell wall that we're talking about, right? Those are still membranes. And you may hear me talk often about the body being this massive apartment complex. You have 30 trillion cells, and each of these cells is defined by this three-dimensional membrane structure around it. And this membrane walls are built fundamentally of lipids, fat, and they're a combination of phospholipids, which create this phospholipid bilayer, and cholesterol. So cholesterol is one of the most important molecules in the human body. And you can always judge the importance of a molecule by how many regulatory systems are involved with it, and how independent the human body is, or any body is, to environmental availability. So cholesterol, you can be 100% vegetarian and never eat a molecule of cholesterol in your entire life, and your body will still have lots of cholesterol. So it can make cholesterol from anything. It makes it from the glucose. You can make cholesterol from glucose. It can make cholesterol from fatty acids. It can make cholesterol from amino acids. So it can make it from the simplest possible molecule in human biochemistry, which is a little molecule called acetyl-CoA. And it's about 30 steps to make a molecule of cholesterol. It's irreversible once you make it. So cholesterol is like biochemical titanium. It's virtually indestructible molecule. And it's made that way, and your body recycles it over and over and over again. That's a very powerful molecule. And it's so important, for example, that your brain doesn't even trust the rest of your body to make cholesterol. Your brain says, you know what, liver, heart, you guys take care of yourself. We got this. I'm going to make my own cholesterol, and maybe if I have a little extra, I'll give you some later on. But so none of your cholesterol in your blood ever makes it to your brain. So your brain has this entirely independent cholesterol biosynthesis capacity. That's how important cholesterol is to the human body.
It kind of is reminding me of plasmalogens in a way, because you said that your body also makes its own plasmalogens, and aren't they also stored in the membranes?
Exactly. So every single cell makes its own plasmalogens. Every single cell makes its own cholesterol for the most part. And then choline molecules like phosphorylcholine, single myelin type, the choline type structure, That's the other third really critical lipid that the human body makes a lot of it by itself. But
And
those
they
three,
support the membrane structure, right? But
it's the membrane
plasmalogen
structure.
is more about flexibility,
Yeah.
and cholesterol is more about, it's like the titanium. So
Yeah, so what cholesterol is like, so and when we measure blood cholesterol, we're not even measuring physiological cholesterol. Okay, 85% of the cholesterol in the body is in your membranes. Very small amount of it circulating in your blood. So we're not actually measuring the cholesterol in the cells of your body. We're measuring a totally different type of cholesterol. But your body takes this flat pancake of cholesterol and it stuffs it into the membrane. And the more cholesterol it puts in a membrane, the stiffer it gets. So parts of your membrane will be nice and stiff, like so myelin and some very protective coating parts of your body needs high levels of cholesterol, and some have less that are more flexible. So your body has a very tight correlation or calibration of it. So plasmalogens are used for fluidity and flexibility. Cholesterol is used for rigidity. And your body has very strict ways of regulating that, just like the thermostat on your wall. And so in a very simple sense, your body has two, and obviously there's reams of textbooks and scientific literature on all the different aspects of cholesterol. So please don't think that you're getting the entire cholesterol story.
Yeah, give me the Spark Notes.
Right. So the core component are two main areas. So people call it good cholesterol and bad cholesterol.
Yes,
so
I've heard those.
LDL cholesterol is fundamentally your cholesterol feeding system. Like this is what your liver makes most of it, LDL, and it distributes it on the blood. And all your cells of your body have a receptor called the LDL receptor, which allow it to absorb cholesterol. So this is the way that we feed. There's a feeding system that all cells can get. If the cell doesn't have enough of its own cholesterol, it seems to be somewhat deficient in cholesterol, it can absorb cholesterol from the blood through this LDL receptor. And then the second cholesterol system is called the HDL system. So high
That's
density.
good cholesterol, right?
Correct.
I think H happy.
H is happy, yes, exactly. But HDL does not enter the cells of your body. HDL sits on the outside of your cells. And so when your cells get enough cholesterol of their own, so like this, if you have solar panels on your house, for example, and you're using less energy in your house than your solar panels are creating, you can donate energy back to the grid. So HDL is basically how your cells donate their cholesterol back into the circulatory system. And so when your cells want to get rid of some cholesterol, they can export it. And what happens is there's three components of this export system, which is one is plasmalogens, specifically the DHA plasmalogens, omega-3 plasmalogens, and that's what the Proton Neuro is about. And that's what's going to be on special at the end of the day here. But very specifically, DHA plasmalogens increase the rate of what's called cholesterol esterification and increases HDL reverse cholesterol transport. And by doing that, it allows cholesterol to come out. And the second part is the phosphatidylcholine system. People may have heard of PC. So phosphatidylcholine is what takes the cholesterol from your cell and puts it on the HDL particle. And then the HDL particle takes it back to your liver.
So it sounds like when it was LDL, cholesterol, HDL, when now you're mentioning particles. So the HDL is transporting the cholesterol around. It's not the cholesterol itself.
Correct. So
Okay.
these are called lipoproteins, apolipoproteins. And so there's different types. Many will hear of apolipoprotein type E. That's the one that's in the brain for the most part. There's a little bit in the periphery, mostly in the brain. And that's ambidextrous. The apolipoprotein E's can act as both LDL and HDL. Most people, when they call about LDL cholesterol, it's called apolipoprotein B, or B100 typically is what's called.
Okay.
And then that's the one that can go into the cells. There's a receptor that can bring that receptor. And then HDL is called apolipoprotein A2, if you will. And it does not enter.
So it's a protein that the cholesterol that is able to transport the cholesterol out of the cell and into the bloodstream in case somebody else needs that cholesterol. And
Correct.
the
And
LDL takes it into the cell.
Correct.
So the proteins move it around.
Yeah. And it doesn't move. It's not like the cholesterol sticking on the edges and outsides. It's actually in a ball. Like you have a phospholipid ball. So you have these phospholipids, like these polar head groups, and inside the ball, there is esterified cholesterol, so inactivated cholesterol. So we transport inactivated cholesterol. It's called esterified cholesterol. And the triglycerides are on the inside of the ball. It's actually, the cholesterol itself is protected by the apolipoprotein phospholipid sphere, if you will, because that's what makes it soluble in water. Okay, so you want to, like the triglycerides and the cholesterol esters are completely insoluble in water. So they stick on the inside and they have
So
these holes.
why is LDL cholesterol given such a bad rep? Like, why is it bad? It seems to be associated with cardiovascular dysfunction.
Because because it's susceptible to oxidation. Okay, so now when you have oxidative stress, fundamentally peroxidation. So this endothelial dysfunction really all begins at hydrogen peroxide level. So what happens then is the LDL particle is susceptible to oxidative stress and it can become oxidized. And it's not the cholesterol that gets oxidized in
It's
LDL cholesterol.
the thing that's transporting the cholesterol around.
It's actually the phospholipid, and it's specifically phosphatidylcholine. And if you really want to get very, very precise, it's actually an omega-6 fatty acid called arachidonic acid. Okay, it's arachidonic acid on the LDL particle that gets oxidized on the LDL, or it also gets oxidized on another lipid particle that people get that are popular to talk about. It's called LP little a. But that oxidized phospholipid on the LDL particle, it's also what associates with another inflammatory biomarker that many people will be familiar with called C-reactive protein. So C-reactive protein specifically attaches to the oxidized phosphatidylcholine.
Okay,
Now,
yeah.
that's the nasty molecule. And so, but since it's on LDL, and if you have endothelial dysfunction, this oxidized LDL particle will sneak through the endothelial layer and it becomes an irritant. And then what happens is, since it's irritated, immune cells come inside that endothelial layer, the macrophages. And these macrophages try to absorb this oxidized LDL. And they become the pearl that we talked about, right? But it's not a good pearl, a bad pearl. So these foamy macrophages basically become, they try to sequester this oxidized LDL and they get bigger and bigger.
So basically, I mean, there's a lot of the LDL, all these different components here, but you're basically saying that the LDL cholesterol is more susceptible to oxidative stress or oxidation due to this hydrogen peroxide, which I'm guessing is the same as the hydrogen peroxide I'm thinking of. They're probably all the same. So it's kind of, to oversimplify, more prone to becoming like rusty.
Correct.
And it's actually the phospholipid, or what's more susceptible to becoming rusty, you said?
Well, it's these polyunsaturated fatty acids. And so
fatty acids that are also on this cholesterol and this LDL raft that's carrying this ball around is more susceptible to getting rusty.
Yes.
And then what happens is it gets stuck in the layers of the garden hose, which causes it then to kind of kink, and ultimately then blood is restricted as it's flowing throughout the body.
Correct. And then the body tries to get rid of it, right? And there's another lipoprotein enzyme that many people, if they Google, they'll find. It's called lipoprotein associated phospholipase A2. I'm going to totally geeking out on you here on this one. But this phospholipase A2 will actually cleave the oxidized arachidonic acid off. And so arachidonic acid, what creates leukotrienes.
So where does arachidonic acid come from? I feel like do we eat it?
Well, we don't really eat a lot of arachidonic acid. We get some of it from animal products, but fundamentally we make it. We make it from linoleic acid, so omega-6 fatty acids. So,
but we eat omega-6? Oh.
We get lots of that. So corn, soy, canola, all of those basic omega-6 fat sources. And so we have our society has we've been bombarded with an overabundance of omega-6 in our diet. And it disrupts the omega-6 to omega-3 balance. So omega-3, which many will know as alpha-linolenic acid that comes from flax, for example, or grass-fed meat. And then that alpha-linolenic acid can be made up into DHA, which is your long-chain polyunsaturated omega-3. So DHA is anti-inflammatory. Arachidonic
puts out the fire.
Is pro-inflammatory.
Starts the fire.
Correct. And it's very interesting because you can actually, the ratio of the DHA to arachidonic acid ratio is actually a very powerful predictor of cardiovascular disease itself, just by itself.
It's just this equilibrium you're trying to maintain, and that's why your diet is important, and your cardiovascular health. And so this LDL, this oxidized LDL is not the the cause. It's a symptom. It's showing you that there's dysfunction, but it's not the LDL's fault. It's the fact that if you're getting a blood test and seeing high levels of LDL, it's because they're most likely or more easily oxidized or kind of rusty.
If you have elevated oxidized LDL, if you have elevated C-reactive protein, like these elevated malondialdehyde levels, like these are all indicators that you have elevated levels of oxidative stress. And so all oxidative stress fundamentally comes from your cells being unable to efficiently neutralize the burning of fuel, basically. So when we burn fuel, we make this carbon dioxide and we create all this electron energy. And now the molecule is called NADH. This is where all the electrons are stored and protons are stored. The H, like the H in NADH becomes the H in H2O, water. So your body so the oxygen you're breathing in is actually used to neutralize these electrons and protons. And so it creates water. But if your body can't do that, these electrons build up. Instead of oxygen being converted into water, oxygen gets converted into these reactive oxygen species. Superoxide anion, hydrogen peroxide, hydroxyl radical, then you get the peroxidized membranes, and then you go, and so your body has a whole bunch of mechanisms to deal with this. So it is natural. It's actually natural, and it's healthy to have a certain amount of oxidative stress because your body reacts to it. So that's why people know about glutathione, for example. So when people think about glutathione as an antioxidant, glutathione's job is to neutralize hydrogen peroxide. And so catalase is another enzyme that does that. Plasmalogens are a major, major neutralizer of peroxides.
Oh yeah, so 50% of the heart lipids are made of plasmalogen.
And that's one of the issues that we're having this myocarditis epidemic, if you will, is heart inflammation that's kind of been plaguing our society right now. Because when the heart gets inflamed, when you have an inflammatory event, the same PLA2, this lipoprotein one that goes into the foamy macrophages I was telling you about, all your cells have this. And when you have an inflammatory event in your heart, these enzymes pump out the plasmalogens of your membranes to douse the fire. And so you can become plasmalogen deficient in your heart, and which is okay for a short period of time because your body is designed to do that. And then you can kind of rebuild your plasmalogen stores over time. But if you have myocarditis or inflammatory situation for too long of a period of time, then you can't fill those stores up fast enough. And so that's kind of where, so we have all these other biomarkers of cardiovascular disease. So LDL cholesterol is not the only one. There's cardiovascular disease is such a major event. We've been studying it, 6 ways from Sunday for 100 years. So we have lots of biomarkers that are associated with outcomes, associated with mortality. And it's very interesting if you take a look at each one of these biomarkers, every single one of them, it leads you back to oxidative stress and this endothelial that related to endothelial dysfunction. So for example, high levels of uric acid. Okay, people think about uric acid for gout, but it's actually associated with cardiovascular disease. Well, high uric acid is caused by elevated NADH levels, which means your body's not neutralizing it. A good one is type 2 diabetes. The main complication of type 2 diabetes is cardiovascular disease. And if you're type 2 diabetic and you have high levels of glucose in your blood, that means that your cells are inefficient at processing glucose. And if they're inefficient at processing glucose, there's going to be oxidative stress being formed. And
so it's your body's ability to properly or efficiently process energy.
Exactly. That's where it all starts from.
If it's not able to handle the load, or if there's a lot of waste product as a result, those things contribute to stress, oxidative stress. Interesting. So the biomarkers you were talking about, we had C-reactive proteins and uric acid and high triglyceride levels. Those are all kind of the prodromes of cardiovascular dysfunction. The prodrome is that which comes before. So before a serious event or before you may even really notice it, you could take a blood test and work with your physician and look into these patterns, right?
Yeah. The human body is designed to work in a certain way. it's incredibly elegant. Your cardiovascular system is designed. Your arteries and your endothelial layer is supposed to flex. And as it flexes, it's supposed to send neurological signals back to your heart to adjust your heart rate properly. Okay, as your blood pressure. So for example, when we talk about your blood flow, right, at rest, okay, you have a resting heart rate of say 60 and your blood pressure is at 110 or 120, which are super healthy, and you're pumping 5 liters of blood a minute. If you're physically active, that can go to 15 to 20 liters per minute. Well, your blood pressure doesn't go from 110 to 500. Okay, like when you're exercising, you don't all of a sudden get a blood pressure of like, so your ability to really expand your blood flow and still maintain your blood pressure within acceptable range means that your body that endothelial walls have to be able to expand and contract with the demand of your body. And this is why this endothelial layer is so critically important to get right. And so all of these situations that we're talking about with high, so the body is designed to work. We know what it's supposed to look like. So we know what your triglycerides are supposed to be. So if your triglycerides are elevated, if they're over 100, okay, even if they're over 130 for sure, that means when your fat cells are sending fatty acids out to be metabolized by your body, they're going into your cells and your cells saying, oh, can't take all these fatty acids. I'm going to send them back to your fat cells. So you recycle fat. But that clearly indicates that you have an energy metabolism problem. And if you have an energy metabolism problem, you have oxidative stress. Okay, fundamentally, because it means that your body, it's like following a car on the freeway and a bunch of smoke coming out the tailpipe. Okay, that means that car in front of you is not efficiently burning the fuel. There's something wrong with the fuel air mixture in that car in front of you, and you get all the smoke coming out. Well, the smoke for the human body is high glucose, high triglycerides in your blood supply. It means your fuel system is sending fuel to your cells. Your fat cells are sending fuel. Your glycogen stores are sending fuel, and your cells are saying, I don't have enough oxygen. I can't process this. And you get this smoke, which turns out to be high triglycerides.
How does someone restore, or if they're already in good health, maintain good cardiovascular health? What are some things before they even get a blood test back? What are things that people can do to just maintain good cardiovascular health right now?
There's really 2 core components of restoring cardiovascular health and maintaining it. Okay, so say you're here and you have atherosclerosis already, or you have some cardiac risk factors that like physiological issues, right? And so you have plaque. You say, well, how do I get rid of this plaque if I have it now? And so that's where the HDL good cholesterol comes in. This is why people have done IV therapies with phosphorylcholine to improve this reverse cholesterol transport. So you need to be able to improve the cholesterol transport system, which is the HDL, phosphorylcholine, DHA plasmalogens. Okay, you need to restore the membrane structure of it. But then you have to stop the source of the inflammation, which is this peroxide oxidative phospholipid program. Okay, like bringing the C-reactive protein levels down are critical. And so this is where the plasmalogens have been very powerful, very reproducible, lowering the C-reactive protein levels. So in the paper, in the clinical trial that you and I did with Regenesis, for example, right, we did this dose-dependent increase in plasmalogens, and what we found was a dose-dependent decrease in malondialdehyde. So we could, as plasmalogens were elevated in the blood supply, oxidative stress markers went way down. C-reactive protein went down, malondialdehyde levels went down, and the enzyme that neutralizes peroxides, catalase, goes up. So low levels of plasmalogens are well associated with adverse cardiovascular outcomes. So those are published research. So low plasmalogens are bad. So you want to deal with 2 things. You want to deal with the intracellular energy capacity. So improve mitochondrial and peroxisomal beta oxidation. So people talk about exercise, right? So if you think about how the best way to naturally cure type 2 diabetes, that's one of the best ways to improve your cardiovascular health. Because if you think about it, type 2 diabetes, one of its major complications is cardiovascular disease. So if you can improve exercise, okay, so your neuromuscular, your physical skeletal muscle mass, improve your get your triglycerides lowered, and you'll find that if you lower your triglycerides and you improve your glucose regulation, all of a sudden your plasmalogen levels will go up, your HDL levels will go up, because those are the natural, like they're being consumed. So you want to get good HDL levels, And this is where it really gets kind of confusing for people, because we talk about cardiovascular health. And one of the strategies for the last 40 years, okay, since even more. So the statins came out in the 80s. Before the 80s, we had what was called bile acid binders. And the strategy has always been to lower LDL, right? And so if we can, it's basically taking the baby out with the bathwater. So if we can just get rid of all the LDL, we'll get rid of the oxidized LDL at the same time. And
Oh,
so,
go ahead.
go ahead. So
No,
yes, go ahead.
keep going, and then I'll go.
I lost my track. So so this idea of lowering LDL cholesterol is came from, it's been around for a long, long time. It actually really originated with familial hypercholesterolemia. Okay, that's really where the whole cholesterol lowering and cardiovascular disease started. But what's confusing to most people is if you look at the level of cholesterol that humans actually want. Okay, what is the level of cholesterol in the people who live the longest? Okay, so when we look at all-cause mortality, and you'll find that people with cholesterol levels between 120 LDL in the 120 to 140 range have the lowest all-cause mortality. They live the longest. People with HDL in the say 50 to 70 range, they have the longest lifespan. And so your total cholesterol level, the human body wants to be in that 220 to 240 range. And it actually makes a lot of sense, because it says that cells are healthy. They're producing enough. They're recirculating. The HDL levels are good. They're recirculating their cholesterol. They're effectively sharing it. It's almost like heart rate variability, fundamentally. And that's what you want for all of your systems of your body. All of your systems of your body should be adaptable. They should be able to flex with demand. And the cholesterol system is no different than the rest of those.
So interesting. So you mentioned, as far as maintaining and restoring health, things that people could do now. Plasmalogens was something you mentioned. And then earlier we mentioned, as far as diet, lowering those levels of omega-6, which are found in canola oil, corn, things like that.
Basically reduce the inflammation
Reducing
of your diet.
inflammation.
That you want to have a low inflammatory diet. You want to have a high omega-3 to omega-6 ratio in your food supply. So, and there's many, many examples of good low inflammatory diets. The other one is fasting. Your body is designed to have a cycle of being fed and being fasted, right? And so we should have a period when you're in the fasting state, your body is running off of free fatty acids from your adipose tissue. And very interesting point here is that that's what your heart lives on. Okay, your heart doesn't live on sugar. Your heart lives on fat and fatty acids. And it's another interesting with the cardiovascular system and the skeletal muscle system, but the heart especially, it's one of the few organs and cell types in the body that is basically immune to cancer. Like having cancer of the heart is almost a completely unheard of system. You might get it a little bit as a stage 4, metastasis perspective, but you don't, because cells that use fatty acids for energy, which is what we use in the fasting state, have a very low risk of cancer. So lots of cool stuff.
That's so interesting. And I think it's a great time to segue to our Q&A, because I had one more question about exercise, and someone had dropped that in the question and answers. So if you guys want to start adding some more questions to the Q&A, we'll transfer over there. And the question was, we know exercise is important for health, but doesn't exercise generate like reactive oxygen species, is what the question asks. And then the part 2 is, can you overdo it and to deplete plasmalogens through exercise?
2 really good questions. And I always tell people exercise is bad for you. Recovering from exercise is good for you. And so what you exercise for is to trick your body. You're trying to trick your body into adapting to a higher level of demand than you actually needs to be. So it trains itself. So when you exercise, you require higher levels of oxygen, you require higher levels of blood flow, and your body gets trained to adapt to that so that you can more efficiently use higher and higher levels of oxygen. So your oxygen utilization gets better and better. So that when you're in the resting state, you have created a reserve capacity, not only in blood flow, but in oxygen utilization. And that's one of the challenges. So if you don't exercise and you're just always just on the couch, then your body reaches that equilibrium with that low level of energy. And so then if you have to run up and down the street, you have no, you're not trained for it anymore. So so you do controlled stress and then rest, controlled stress and then rest. Same thing with the plasmalogen. So exercise is oxidatively demanding, and you're tearing muscles and you're waiting for them to rebuild themselves. And you want to make sure you're feeding yourself the appropriate nutrients so that you, on your recovery phase, you're getting stronger. Which is why certain supplements like creatine, carnitine, like we've been using bodybuilders for years and years and years. Like if you take these supplements, you're not going to get bulky unless you exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll work out their muscles. What they do is they break muscles down, but they carefully feed themselves with the right nutrients to rebuild that muscle. Plasmalogens are very similar to that. So your body has a capacity to make plasmalogens, and your musculature and your peroxisomal system is more adept than others. But yeah, you can overdo it. You can overdo anything.
Yeah.
But certainly as we get older, and I think that's one of the issues with these premium athletes that are just like the prime human specimens, if you will, in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, but often they don't age that well because they have burnt themselves out. So yeah, you can definitely get too much of a good thing. But as long as you feed it back in, the body adapts. The body adapts to everything you need it.
Another question is from Kathleen. She asked, do plasmalogens impact how your body processes and manages cholesterol?
Very much so. So plasmalogens and cholesterol are yin and yang. So for example, the ApoE4 genotype for Alzheimer's, the increased risk for Alzheimer's disease is people that have one or two E4 alleles. The apolipoprotein E is fundamentally a cholesterol transport. It is almost the exclusive cholesterol transport molecule in the human brain. And it acts both as LDL and HDL. But it's the HDL portion of it that contributes to increased Alzheimer's risk. The antidote to the ApoE4 genotype is the DHA plasmalogens. Okay, so Prodome Neuro, what it does is so the balancing, whereas the ApoE4, like the HDL cholesterol is the transport mechanism, the plasmalogens improve the ability for the cholesterol to be esterified and then transported out of the membranes. And so they work yin and yang. So as we get older, as your plasmalogen levels decrease, okay, not in everybody, but in some, the plasmalogen levels will negatively affect your cholesterol transport. Fundamentally, it negatively affects your reverse cholesterol transport, your HDL levels. So people who have high plasmalogens typically have high HDL levels, and they typically have low triglyceride levels as a general rule.
Another question from Roland is, can plaque be reversed? Or is it like scar tissue that hangs around indefinitely?
It can definitely be reduced. It's the family macrophages, and there's been a lot of evidence of that, especially with regards to certain IV therapies. So IV therapies where you're actually infusing HDL co-expressed with phosphatidylcholine definitely has shown to reduce plaque progression. And so even in the clinical trials, this is where the cardiovascular system becomes really important. So when you improve your cardiovascular system, if you take a look at studies, look at the relationship between heart rate variability and plaque progression rates, and they separate people based upon their heart rate variability, which is an indicator of general cardiovascular strength.
Mm-hmm.
People that have really high heart rate variability, so that they're good heart, they'll actually show reversal, okay? Stable and slight reversal. So yeah, the answer is yes. So the reverse cholesterol, you need to basically move the cholesterol out of the foamy macrophages and systematically. So fundamentally, anything in the human body over time can be dissipated.
Thank you. And one last question is from Gary. He asked, can you address arterial stiffness and arterial compliance? This is a systemic phenomenon, but more importantly, can you delve into how we can rebuild the microvascular network?
Yeah, so this is really, the hydrogen peroxide is, so when the vasodilation rate, which is basically the ability for cells to relax, so for your blood pressure to be reduced, so vasodilation. So the nitric oxide system goes kind of yin and yang with this hydrogen peroxide system. So when you have oxidized stress, your body will actually constrict your capillaries and constrict the endothelial layer because of you don't want to create, you don't want to create additional problems on that. So the arterial stiffness is very much related to the membrane suppleness. Okay, and membranes fundamentally are, and so if you have phosphatidylcholine deficiencies are quite common, and we very, like proton scan test is one of the few tests that actually measures your phosphatidylcholine levels. And it's been one of the things that irritated me for years and years and years, because the clinical data on it is so robust, but getting a good measurement of the actual phospholipid composition was very difficult to do. So that's what so your phosphatidylcholine levels, your DHA plasmalinogens are critical for membrane suppleness, because you're dealing with this interlocking cell membrane, right? With this the endothelial layer that's surrounding the lumen. And when it expands and it contracts, it has to do so while the junctions of those cells remain tight. And so that's a suppleness of it. And so the quality of the phospholipids in the membrane are fundamentally the driving force of arterial stiffness, okay? And the compliance, or the pliability, or the flex. And this flex is very important, because it's the flex of the membrane that stimulates the nitric oxide vasodilation system. So yeah, it really, these things are so much interconnected with each other.
Thank you. Yeah, I've learned a lot this evening. I hope you all have too. Thank you so much, Dr. Goodenowe, for joining us and answering all of our questions and breaking this down for us. I hope this was helpful, and we hope to see you also in March when we talk about multiple sclerosis. So if you know anyone who might be interested in learning more about that, please let them know where to find us at prodrome.com, and we will see you next month.
There's very exciting stories about multiple sclerosis and the white matter disease. We know so much more about it, and the advanced MRI that we now have on MS, very, very interesting stories that we have. Yeah, so thank you very much, everybody. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.